Shadow Slave. By Guiltythree. Chapter 1261, A Butterfly Flapping Its Wings. There was a black dot in the sky, far in the distance, slowly moving in the direction of the dark island. At first, Sunny felt a glimmer of hope ignite in his heart as he remembered a similar situation from the past. That time, it had turned out to be Kai. But, this time, his intuition was ringing alarm bells, and a cold feeling of dread crept from somewhere to grip him with icy claws. Sitting on the shadow chair with his legs crossed, Sunny leaned back and sighed. Crap. With that, he exploded with a flurry of activity. First, Sunny dismissed his precious chair and dashed toward the middle of the island. At the same time, he sent a mental command to Saint Nephis and she were currently engaged in a furious sword fight. Light and darkness were intertwined in a shimmering whirlpool of sharp steel, and the graceful knight's onyx figure was starkly contrasted against the rippling white tunic and alabaster skin of her slender opponent. Following Sunny's order, Saint froze. The tip of Neph's sword stopped a split second later, hovering millimeters away from the slit of her visor. Nephis frowned, then retracted her sword and looked around. There was a shadow on a rock outcropping that protruded from the ground a few meters away. It seemed to belong to a young man, and was currently waving its arms in the air while pointing at the sky. She swiftly turned around and looked up, then dashed away a moment later. That's done. Running as fast as he could, Sunny leaped over a murky puddle of water and landed near a half-eaten fragment of tarnished silver. The scrawny figure of Imp could be seen nearby, laying on the ground with a blissful smile on his fiendish face. His hands were rubbing his ballooning belly with delight. Stand up, buddy. The gluttonous goblin opened his eyes and stared at Sunny in confusion, then awkwardly tried to rise to his feet. However, outweighed by his full stomach, Imp lost. Sunny leaned down, grabbed the weakly struggling fiend, and hoisted him on his shoulder. His balance and promptly plopped back down. Ah, we don't have time for this. Sunny leaned down, grabbed the weakly struggling fiend, and hoisted him on his shoulder. What the hell? Just how much had the little bastard swallowed up? Even with the strength of an ascended tyrant, Sunny was struggling to carry Imp. His veins swelled, and a befuddled expression appeared on his face. Commanding the shadows to wrap themselves around his body, he grunted and continued to run. A dozen seconds later, Sunny reached the edge of the familiar fissure and unceremoniously tossed the little fiend down. Then, he threw one more look at the sky and, noticing that the black dot had already drawn nearer, jumped into the deep ravine himself. Before too long, Nephis and he were side by side, pressing themselves into the weathered slope of the fissure as they desperately tried to calm down their breathing. Saint and Fiend were nearby, the former standing calmly, the latter hugging Sunny's thigh. Nightmare was there as well, hiding within the deep darkness enveloping the bottom of the gorge in his shadow form. Lastly, a beautiful amphora of white clay was standing on the ground in front of them, its surface decorated with mesmerizing patterns. It was another one of the memories Summer Night had given to Nephis, and its purpose was to mask their presence. Gods only knew if the amphora was going to work or not. Out of Sunny's 5 shadows, one had to volunteer to leave its area of effect and serve as a scout, though. Well, perhaps volunteer was the wrong word. Since the gloomy shadow had performed a few dangerous tasks recently, and the happy fool was not someone Sunny would ever entrust an important matter to, the next in seniority had to go. So, the creepy guy was currently hiding a few meters away from the edge of the fissure, staring creepily at the sky. The sin of solace was keeping it company with a bored expression on his face. The sparks swirling around Sunny's hand formed into an emerald flute, and he covered them with a dome of silence. Then, he let out a shaky breath. I see it. Nephis looked at him intently, then asked in a low voice, "What is it?" Sunny lingered for a few moments. Slowly, his expression turned grim. It's a butterfly. Indeed, a butterfly was descending toward the island. From afar, it seemed like an ethereal and beautiful creature. But as it drew closer, Sunny couldn't help but shiver. The butterfly's wings and back were black, but its body and underbelly were the color of white bone. It had 6 long, seemingly fragile legs that ended in sharp points, and 2 enormous, faceted eyes that were like orbs of pure darkness. Between them was a disturbingly long, oily black beak, which was currently bent into a spiral like an elephant's trunk. 2 antennae rose from its head, pushed back by the current of the wind. Apart from that, the butterfly was at least 100 meters in size. It was both exquisitely beautiful and deeply revolting. But, most of all, it was deeply frightening. Sonny gritted his teeth. It's another great monster. His heart was beating rapidly in his chest, and his back was covered with cold sweat. Great. This is just great. Great. Ha, it literally is. By his side, Nephi scowled. What about? The monstrous butterfly was obviously intending to land on the island, but at that moment, the crimson water parted, and the azure serpent's scaled snout rose into the air. Pierced by a mad gaze of its cloudy eyes, the great monster suddenly seemed wary. It moved its wings and altered the direction of its flight, circling the corpse of the black turtle from above instead of diving down to land on the black rock. The butterfly's huge eyes were aimed at the ancient serpent, and its antennae twitched rhythmically. The great beast of the river bared its bloodied fangs and let out a furious roar, as if announcing its claim of the remains of the titanic turtle. This demented old snake. Did the serpent not want to live? Why was it going around challenging great monsters? Am I really such a delicacy? Sonny did not know what the giant butterfly was thinking, but one thing was certain. It did not like that serpent's challenge. It did not like it at all. Chapter 1262, A Shrimp Between Two Whales. Sonny described what was happening in a hushed voice. He didn't really need to whisper, considering that they were surrounded by a dome of silence, but it made him feel better. And what was happening appeared pretty clear. The monstrous butterfly had been attracted by the smell of blood and arrived to feast on the corpse of the black turtle that the azure serpent had so laboriously killed. The azure serpent, meanwhile, was having none of it. In fact, judging by the madness burning in its eyes, the great beast was overcome with the bloody desire to rip the giant butterfly apart as well. This thing really doesn't know what's good for it, huh? What was the reason for the azure serpent's reckless insolence? Humans often described nightmare creatures as mad, but that description was not entirely accurate. The abominations were indeed insane, but that did not mean that they lacked sanity. Rather, it meant that their sanity was perverted, sinister, ineffable, and entirely different from what humans deemed sane. So why would the great beast risk its life fighting much more powerful monsters? Was it indeed madness? Was it pride? Was it reluctance to give up such an enormous prize, or was it more reluctant to surrender two human souls that burned the flames of divinity to the stronger abomination? Whatever the reason was, the stubborn Leviathan seemed ready to battle the monstrous butterfly to the death. The butterfly let out an indescribable sound. The waters of the great river suddenly grew restless, rippling as they were assaulted by the powerful sonic waves. The serpent roared again, rising higher above the river's tumultuous surface. I think they are going to fight. Sonny was not sure what it meant for the two of them. He was belatedly happy about his decision to abandon the skies and seek shelter on the shell of the black turtle. If something like that butterfly had caught him in the air, he would have surely been dead in an instant. However, now that Nephi's and he were trapped on the dark island, their fates seemed to be swaying on the edge of a perilous abyss. They were deeply unsure of their ability to slay a great beast. But a great monster was far more dreadful. They were only alive now because the azure serpent either lacked the ability or was reluctant to crawl out of the water. If the abominable butterfly won the battle, though, nothing was going to stop it from doing just that. Then, their shelter would turn into a deadly trap. So, no matter how strange it sounded, Sonny had no choice but to root for the familiar great beast that had been staring at them hungrily for many days, wishing to swallow them whole. The azure serpent had already killed one great monster. Maybe the mad snake would be able to pull off another miracle. Finally coming to a decision, the butterfly waved its wings and plummeted down, landing on the shell of the black turtle a moment later. The entire island shook from the devastating force of the impact. The creepy shadow remained motionless as it looked up at the six incredibly thin and long legs of the monster. The pale body of the butterfly was high above the ground, and its wings were open, covering a vast area in deep darkness. Now that it was closer, Sonny could see that it was covered in thick scales, with white hairs growing between them. There was a complicated pattern on the creature's wings, as well, coalescing into a strange image. An image. An image of. Sonny hurriedly commanded the shadow to look away as a strange certainty that he should never, ever try to look directly at the pattern covering the butterfly's wings flooded his mind. Damnation. Sonny. What is happening? He sucked in a shaky breath. They're just staring at each other. The butterfly shifted slightly, the sharp tips of its chitinous legs striking sparks from the black rock. Its trunk-like mouth slowly unfurled, turning into a fearsome black spear dozens of meters long. The abomination let out another harrowing screech, then suddenly struck the surface of the dead turtle's shell with its beak. 1, 2, 3 times. The island quaked, but not even a thin crack appeared on the rock. The butterfly froze for a moment, then twisted its head, looking at the azure serpent. It seemed reluctant to go into the water. Well, of course. One is a flying abomination, and the other is a sea creature. The butterfly has to go into the water if it wants to gorge on the black turtle's meat, but that would mean fighting the azure serpent. And on the enemy's home ground, no less. Maybe it would simply retreat. Just as Sonny thought that, the butterfly suddenly folded its wings and lunged forward. There was no hesitation, no warning. Just a deafening sonic boom and a harrowing black and white blur that suddenly shot toward the serpent like a gigantic javelin. A hurricane gale rose from the confounding fury of the great monster's lunge. It's attacking. A split second later, an enormous pillar of foaming crimson water rose into the sky. The serpent seemed to have managed to avoid the abominable butterfly's obliterating charge. However, its sharp legs tore at the sea creature's azure body. The great monster easily dove into the water, as though the depths were its home. Both creatures were suddenly hidden from view, and only the shaking of the island and the colossal waves that were assaulting its slopes showed that a titanic battle was happening underwater. They're fighting. Nephi's remained silent for a few moments, then gave him a strange look. Sonny. Where are they fighting, in relation to our position? He stared at her in confusion, then said, below water, to the left of the turtle's tail. She lingered a bit, then took a deep breath. Then, they're on the opposite side from the turtle's head. Where the entry wound is. So. While the serpent is preoccupied. Shall we dive down and harvest some meat? He opened his mouth, startled. Then, he slowly closed it again. Dive down. Harvest meat. Are you crazy? Damn. I said it again. Nephi's looked at him very seriously and shook her head. No, I'm not crazy. I'm hungry.